40th anniversary. And so I've only been involved with it since 2009, but I brought with me some other people from the aquarium who have been involved longer than that, or in a couple cases shorter than that. And I'm going to talk for about 30 minutes, and then I'm going to have some of them tell you some things from their memory of the aquarium. So what I'm going to start with is what for I think will be a lot of you is a very quick review of what was going on in the Roundhouse before 1979, which was when the forerunner of the aquarium was founded. If you want to know more about that, I strongly recommend Jan Dennis's book that's about the pier. Jan is sitting back there. You can talk to her about it, but it has a lot more information in it. And I do want to thank Jan and the Historical Society for a couple of these photos that I'm going to be showing here. So the 929-foot pier was built in 1920, and you can see it had a round end, so it was always a plan that there would be a roundhouse there. The roundhouse was dedicated in 1922. It was all one floor, it was a cafe, and it was for the fishermen to come in and talk about the ones that got away and get a cup of coffee. Well, not very many got away back in the 1920s and into the 1940s. It was great fishing. They even had a hoist there where you could measure and weigh your fish. And the red car brought in people from all over to fish on the pier and to go to the cafe. And then in 1928, a 200-foot extension was built on there, and it was a stop for a water taxi that went between Malibu and Redondo Beach. And if you can see at the very end of the pier there, there's a gas station for the water taxi. And that brought even more people. Then in January of 1940, there was a big storm, and it took 90 feet of the extension of the pier. It took it off. And then they took the rest of it off a little bit later and took it out and buried it at sea, and it washed back in one piece. By the end of the 1940s, the fish were disappearing, mainly because they'd been overfished. And the different people who tried to have a cafe in the Roundhouse were having trouble making ends meet. They had a dance hall there for a while, but nobody could really make much of a living on it. And then in the 50s, there were a lot of things going on around the pier, but they didn't involve the Roundhouse that much. There were beauty contests, which your sister won there. There were volleyball and surfing, and this paddleboard advertising. That is so 1950s. And they also had Camera Day, which starlets would come down from Hollywood and people would take their picture. So originally the city built and maintained the pier, but in 1936 the county took over the maintenance of the pier. So that's a fact to remember, because it affects how the Marine Center was done. In 1956, the city sold the pier and the Roundhouse to the state for $1. Now, why would they do that? The pier was getting a bit dilapidated, and the city didn't have money to keep it up. And so the state had the money. So the state did give $305,000 to get the pier into a little bit of better shape. Then in the 60s, things got worse. The fish were gone even more. There were big storms. There was this cave-in at the foot of the pier. And the Roundhouse way out there sort of didn't have a purpose anymore. For a while it was a place for teenagers to gather, and then there were some rival motorcycle gangs that went out there, and some really bad stuff happened toward that time. the pier was closed a lot, and these big orange barrels in front of it, either because of vandalism or because of the weather. We were living here then, as you know, you mentioned just a little bit ago, James, and we were on the Strand, and in our neighborhood there were 21 kids. And kids kind of roamed free during that time. There were no play dates or things like that. But all of the parents who were there told our kids they could not go out on the pier. I'm seeing people shake their heads because it was too dangerous out there. Of course, now that they're grown up, we have learned that they did go out on the pier. They got around those orange barrels, went out and dangled their feet off the end just because they weren't allowed to do it. Another thing that happened was in 1969, whoever was in the Roundhouse at the time with the cafe got evicted. And the next people that got a cafe in the Roundhouse, there was this very strict thing that they could only sell coffee and bait. And that kind of makes you wonder what the guy who got evicted was selling. And, I do not know this, okay? I have not put this in writing anywhere, and I've actually never said it before, but there is some proof, some rumors that for a while the Roundhouse was a drug distribution center. We did have a drug dealer living next door to us for quite a while till he got put in jail. So that was the 60s. Anyhow, whatever was happening out there at this period of time wasn't very good, and the fishermen who were out there weren't really very good citizens, and they would take the fish that they didn't want, or the carcasses of the fish, and throw them on the floor and the walls of the Roundhouse, because it often was abandoned with nobody having a cafe, but the doors were open, and so they would do this. And so the place stunk. Then enter Evelyn Hanna. Evelyn was a teacher at Grandview School, and she knew the pier was dilapidated, but she had the idea that it would be a good place for the Roundhouse to bring school children to teach them about the ocean and the animals. And she called this the Ocean Study Center. It's had a lot of different names. It's now the Roundhouse Aquarium Teaching Center. But she was just a lovely lady, and if any of you were at the forum that I did at the library a couple years ago, she was there. She's now 90 and doesn't travel, but just a wonderful person. And she always wanted to thank the school district because Byron Burgess was the superintendent at the time, and he was just very supportive of everything that she did. And then another person who was involved was a young lawyer, Dick Bruin, who happens to be sitting right back there in the maroon shirt. And he'll be coming up here and talking to you in just a few moments. And he was he did the minutes. He's still very active on our board. And somebody asked me the other day, how long has Dick been doing the minutes? And I said 40 years, because that's where he started as secretary, and he is still our secretary. And his minutes are really the backbone of the research I did when I wanted to find out about the history of this. I've interviewed over 20 people and read a lot of articles, but Dick's minutes are really the backbone. And he was also on the environmental committee of the city. And he kind of took this idea of having a center out there because he had two sons and he was interested in them and having them learn about the ocean. And in 1975, remember that date, 1975, he got the city council to agree to the idea that there would be a marine center out in the Roundhouse. That's not the beginning of the story, nor is it the end of the story, but we'll get to that. Then another lawyer was Vin Del Marsh, and he met Dick through the environmental committee, but he was also the president of the Marine Technology Society, and they collected $11,000 from ARCO and TRW to be the seed money for this marine center that was going to be built. Lindel's wife, Cheryl, her story is that these people that were interested in forming this center were having a meeting at their house, and she was in the kitchen making coffee for everybody, and they decided that she should be part of this nonprofit that they were forming too, and so they gave her work to do. She was a speech therapist. She was getting her master's in speech therapy, and she now works at a school for special needs kids, and she brings them to the aquarium for the classes that we have. And then Debbie DeBus was interested in whales and had a society for it, and Lynne Del talked to her and got her interested in the facility. And then there was Rimmon Fay. And his big thing was pollution, because the Santa Monica Bay was pretty polluted back in the 70s, and he was rather flamboyant about it. He would go to Los Angeles City Council meetings with dead fish on his shoulders that had 2 heads or a bloated bladder or something, just to show what was happening to the animals that were out there. And he was also on the Coastal Commission, but as the LA Times wrote, his uncompromising attitude and open outrage about damaging coastal wetlands and the beachfront got him fired, and he was replaced by a developer.
No, man.
So, to me, it's kind of a confluence of circumstances that brought these 6 people together. They don't remember how they got together. They just were sort of all interested in the same thing. Been interested since about 1975, but it wasn't until 1979 that anything actually happened. Now, as you remember, the state owned the pier, the county maintained it, but it was in Manhattan Beach, so they talked to the Manhattan Beach people about it often too. And although the city council, a city council, had said that the Marine Center could be out there in 1975, that wasn't what they really wanted and what the county wanted. What they really wanted was a restaurant out at the end of the pier. And so they had, for 4 or 5 years, they went through talks with restaurants, but the restaurants always wanted the city to build a tram to go out to the Roundhouse. And in fact, one restaurateur apparently said, I can't possibly put a restaurant out there. No one will ever walk all the way out to the end of the pier. So they also wanted designated parking at the foot of the pier. Well, parking, even back then, it was a big problem. And so these negotiations went nowhere, and once in a while, Dick or some of the other people who were involved, they raise their hand and they'd say, we still want to put a Marine Center out there. And how they actually got it is a little murky. Maybe Dick everybody's got a different story. Maybe Dick will tell you his. But as best I can tell, the city had this building on its hands. It was an abandoned building out there where really bad things were happening. And they wanted somebody in it so that, at least it was occupied. And so they called these 6 people to some sort of a meeting, and somebody in a very condescending voice said to them, well, you can put your whatever you call it out there, but just keep the place clean and locked. And that's sort of how the whole thing started. And the LA Times said, having been a restaurant, dance hall, a coffee shop, and finally an idle nuisance, the 60-year-old Roundhouse at the end of the municipal pier has become a school in its latest revival. So Dick filed the papers in November of 1979. They formed this nonprofit with a tongue-twisting name of Oceanographic Teaching Stations, or OTS for short. They had a meeting, and they elected the officers, and they elected Evie to be the president, Lynne Del to be the vice president, and Dick to be the secretary-treasurer at that point. And then shortly after that, they did hire some staff members, Wendy Gold and Kath Naughton. Wendy was like the director, and Kath was her assistant. They were part-time. They were hardly paid at all, but they were in their 20s and adventuresome. And eventually, of course, they needed grown-up jobs and grown-up pay and grown-up benefits, and so they left by the 80s. But the idea was that the board knew that the Roundhouse was a mess, so they were going to give themselves the spring of 1990 to get it in shape, and then in the fall of 1980, in the fall of 1980, they were going to have classes come in. And they had an arrangement with the Los Angeles County schools that would help them bring these classes in. And that they felt there was a lot of field trip money back there, if you remember field trips. So back in 1980, they thought the money from the field trips would keep the place going. We still have these classes. They're still very much part of our mission there. We teach about 15,000 students a year from all over Los Angeles County there. So they're still very important. It wasn't really an idea originally of being open to the public as an aquarium. It was a place for children to come learn about things. So they started to work, and they had these work parties. And people from this community came into the work parties. The first work party they had, the job was to scrape the dead fish off of the walls and the floor of the Roundhouse. And when they scraped the dead fish off of the walls, the plaster came also. So that was the beginning of Murphy's Law, which is anything that can go wrong will go wrong. I'm not going to go through all the traumas that they have. I have written a book about, this is the book about the early years of the aquarium, and our executive director, Grace Adams, who's back there, she has copies of it. We are having a special since it's our 40th anniversary. If you make a donation of $40 to the aquarium, you get this book for free. So if you would like to do that, just when we're finished talking, just see Grace and she has it for you. But anyhow, I'll just tell you, because of fires, floods, sewage backup, inoperative equipment, break-ins, thefts, red tape, handicap access requirements, curriculum testing, they didn't get this open to classes until 1982. So that's 2 years after they had planned to have it open to the classes. So as you can probably imagine, this $11,000 of seed money that they had gotten from Argonne TRW didn't last, and they had to have some fundraisers. And it's really sad to read about these fundraisers in the minutes. They spent $2,000 to get a mailing, and they got $1,340 in donations. And they paid $50 for a booth at the hometown fair, and they came back with $35 in donations. They did have some whale watches that they made money on. Those were rather good. But in September of 1982, which is 1 month before the classes started coming, they had $270 in the bank. So, what sustained these people through all of this, Dick and the others here? One thing was a group of junior high school kids who came and helped out. And they did all kinds of things. They raised water from the ocean, they did some fundraising, they taught younger kids, they swept the floor, and they called themselves the Squid Squad. And when I found this in the minutes, I had to find some of these people, and they were terribly hard to find. In fact, everybody was hard to find. They had not kept in touch. But I did find 5 of the Squid Squad, and 2 of them were at that forum at the library, Roger and Rick, and they had really great stories, mainly about how well Wendy did her job. And another thing that sustained them was the interaction with the kids who came to the aquarium, the students. And one of the things Wendy did was she had a tank for sand crabs. So the Squid Squad had gone to the beach and gathered up about 100 sand crabs, and they put them in this tank, and with sand, where they all buried in, of course, and some water. And when the kids from the classes would come in, they'd look at the tank, and oh, boring tank, it's just, got sand in it. So Wendy would put them through the class, which included getting water up from the ocean and looking at the plankton under a microscope. And when she was finished, she would throw the plankton into the sand crab tank, and there'd be this explosion of these sand crabs coming up to eat all of this, and the kids would laugh and clap and giggle and really have a good experience with that. And then another thing that sustained them was community support. Evie got Stephanie Taylor, who's in black there, who was a muralist, to paint a mural for free. And this was the highlight of the inside of the Roundhouse. So they didn't have any fish for quite a while. They didn't have the money to have fish. So they had this beautiful mural in there. And a woman donated her seashell collection. As I mentioned, the school district gave lots of things. So they got lots of love, but very little money. And in 1986, they almost closed down. And they didn't have the money to pay the staff to work there. And I really feel if they had closed down, they would have never opened up again. It would have been real hard to find the money. Dick was the president at the time, and he knew some people at Chevron. And Chevron donated $5,000, which kept them afloat. And Chevron has just been an extremely good donor and friend ever since. During the 1980s, the pier was not in good condition. And the city council had committees working on it, but then in 1984, 150 pounds of concrete from under the pier fell on a jogger, George Benda, and he sued the state and the county and the city, and he got $3.26 million, but it had paralyzed him. And so people, were a little more serious now about working on the pier. But it didn't happen for quite a while because there was an argument in town. There was one group of people who thought that the pier should just be repaired, which was going to cost $1.7 million, and that would last for 20 years. Somebody's going to do the math on that in a minute. The other group thought that the pier should be torn down and replaced, and that was going to cost $4 million and it would last for 50 years. And that's one of the groups there. I like their name, Peer Pressure, that they had to that. So OTS got very involved in this. Evie, as the president, wrote a letter. They were for repair of the pier. And part of the reason was there was, I think, what we can call a substantiated rumor now, that if they tore down the pier, they would not have a marine center out at the end of it. They would have something else instead. You guessed it, yeah, a restaurant. So they went back to that idea. And so Dick and Fred Armistead, who was the treasurer then, before our current treasurer, Chuck Nylam, who's sitting back there, they went to city council with a very impressive list of the reasons that the Marine Center should stay out there. And what did happen was that they did decide to repair it, and of course the Marine Center stayed there. So in 1990, they actually started the repair of it, and the, I think it was called the Marine Studies Lab at this point, had to move. And where did they move to? And so once again, Chevron came to the rescue, and they moved into a building in Chevron from 1990 to 1992. Then we go through some other areas here, and I'm going to have Eric come up and talk about this in just a minute. But there was another renovation in 2000, and then the Manhattan Beach Property Owners Association gave money for a van, which we have, which goes out to schools, different places. So we're very happy with that. And also Jim Babbitt and Matt Friedman, who's sitting back there, were board presidents for long periods of time, and Burnell, Beckham, and Keisha and Tesler were the directors. And this is when our current aquarist, Eric Martin, started teaching there, so he knows some things about this period. And then, as I said, I came on the board in 2009, and in 2010, Leadership Manhattan Beach took as its project doing new graphics for the aquarium. We had mostly handwritten, penciled signs up there. And I'll take some credit for this because my husband Paul was in the 2010 Leadership Manhattan Beach class, and he proposed the project with a little bit of pillow talk and some help from the staff, and so that made the place look a lot better at that time. And let's see, Bob was there playing with his band at our dedication of that. We also had financial problems in 2010, mainly because of the recession. By now, the money from the field trips had dried up, so we were living on grants, and the grantors had their money in the stock market, and so our grants went down. And the Beach Reporter wrote an article that we might have to close the doors, and the community came to our rescue, especially two women, Heidi Thompson, who's in the middle, and Jane Davis, who is to her right there. And they threw a fundraiser for us. They pulled it together in 3 weeks and got us $17,000, and so we got over that hurdle. And then in April of 2015, when I was the president of a board, Michael Greenberg came to us, and his idea was not to do a whole renovation the way it wound up. He wanted to do something for about $250,000, which was more money than had been ever heard in the walls of that building before. And so it wound up costing $4.5 million. Michael donated some of it, and the rest of it his organization gathered together. I'm not going to say that this was easy. We had three cultures, a for-profit, a non-profit, and a city government that had to get along on all this. We had a lot of approvals, the Coastal Commission, the state, design issues, technical issues, and a great deal of this fell to John Roberts, who succeeded me as president. And then Michael was out there in his hard hat many a day, helping to solve some of the problems. And the result of it is that we do have a beautiful facility now. And there's one more thing that I think I can mention that sustained these people and still those of us who are working with it today. And it's something Evie told me the very first time that I talked to her. And she said, I had to teach a class at the Roundhouse one day, and I went down early to prepare. And as I was standing at the end of the pier, some dolphins came by. And as I watched them play there, I thought to myself, this is the best place in the whole world. I'd like to have Dick come up now and just say a few words, and then we'll have a few other people.
I thank Lynne for her summary. I think it's a good summary. There are high points. I can add a few little details. The reason the Roundhouse probably got started was because we discovered a funding mechanism. That was the problem. We would have to have full-time employees. We would have other expenses. And the issue is not the desire of those of us who were involved to form the Roundhouse or the aquarium, but to find a way that we could sustain it. And it was Vin Del Marsh who actually found the way. He had a friend, Gary Hastings, at the Los Angeles County Office of Education called LACO. LACO manages a certain number of schools in the county, and they also have an outdoor environmental experience. And they designated us as being one of their outdoor experiences. And then they would sell classes at the Roundhouse to schools that they managed. And that was the funding source that got us started. Of course, we still had a lot of capital expenses to handle, and that's why we had continual funding endeavors. I remember when we got started that we got donations. We got donations from USC of fish trays, for instance. We got donations of aquarium, but we didn't have any life support equipment to pull the water out of the ocean and maintain the aquarium. So we would cut out pictures of fish from magazines, and we would put them on a fish line, hang them from the ceiling in an aquarium which had no water, and we would say, when we get water, when we get funding, we will put this fish in this aquarium. And it worked out fine. I can add to the reason that we use the name Oceanographic Teaching Stations. We had a lot of debate about what it should be called. The significance is the word, or the S, at the end of stations. We originally thought that this would be the first of the oceanographic teaching stations that we would pull into existence. As it turned out, we were the first, and then many other aquaria appeared along this part of the coast. First it was Santa Monica, and then Redondo Beach, and other aquaria such as that. Anyway, it was a work in progress, always was, and probably still is. We always got a lot of support from the community. It is true that Chevron bailed us out sometime in the mid-'80s probably, and certainly when they closed the pier in order to repair it, we had to leave. And the question was, should we just close down, or should we do something else? And my feeling was, if we close down, we will never open again. So, I had a lunch with the manager of the refinery, the Chevron refinery, and the connection there was that Chevron was a client of my law firm. So we had a little lunch, and Rod Spackman, you saw his picture, was there. And I proposed that Chevron should provide property to us on, of course, a rental basis or a as-used basis, so that we could put a double trailer, and that they would fund the double trailer so that we could move the Roundhouse or the aquarium from the Roundhouse to the double trailers at Chevron's property. And Rod Spackman says, oh, no, that doesn't make any sense at all. Well, the manager of the refinery drove me back, and because I parked at the refinery to go to this lunch, and he told me, sometimes Dick's staff doesn't think broadly enough. They're too limited in their thinking. So, as it turned out, Chevron did support us when we moved to the refinery property and have continued to support us. He later became president of Chevron, and I've always thought about his words of wisdom about thinking too narrowly. Anyway, we have a lot of people from the Roundhouse here. Grace was already mentioned, Eric was already mentioned, John Roberts is our president, Matt Friedman is our former, before Lynn, president. Chuck Milam lives down the street from me. As we pick board members over the last decades, we always pick board members who had a particular skill or time so that they could provide services to the Roundhouse. And that's worked out very well. Now we're in a new day, and we'll have to look forward to what the future will bring. Thank you very much.
Okay, Eric, would you come up next and just talk a little bit about there?
Hi, Lynn. I just happened to see somebody that I've known for an awfully long time. Anyways, I'm not a board member. I'm actually one of the employees. I'm one of the head people there that take care of the animals and make sure things don't fall off the walls and stuff like that. So I was trying to think how I'm actually going to talk to you guys. Me basically joining the Roundhouse, it was awesome when Lynn showed all these people way back. I had no clue way back my life was actually going to be going to the Roundhouse and educating and dealing with fish and everything, because I'm going to go, when I mentioned Lynn over there way back in the early 80s, we worked together here in Manhattan Beach in a place called 1 Hour Color Photo, which was in Manhattan Mall. We had a nice little family there and everything. Everybody knew each other, and it was a great place. Great place to work. And Lynn knew, actually, at that time, I was involved with whales. I mean, I would get phone calls, still as today, there's killer whales out there, I go travel out there, boom. So my life has always been dealing with the ocean. Born Manhattan Beach, grew up in El Segundo, sorry, it's not Manhattan Beach. Did a lot of surfing, everything still off Manhattan Beach Pier, whatever. I've seen that pier change. So I've seen basically the Roundhouse before the Roundhouse changed. I was fishing off that pier, catching crabs, buying bait from the pier at that time with my dad back in the 70s and stuff like that. So anyways, so how things started to come into play here, me with my whale stuff, I basically was involved in an organization called the American Cetacean Society, which Beanie the Bus was basically the president of that time. She basically asked me to give my very first lecture for the first time ever down in Santa Monica. So that's how I got to know Beanie the Bus. So as time went on through that, I always docked my boat down in Marina Del Rey back and forth, and I saw this one guy that was always loading his boat with tanks. Anyway, so one day, because me with fish, I go, what are you doing? Anything, and need some help pulling your tanks? He goes, I can do this myself. You can just go ahead and tie up your own boat. I go, I saw that you had fish in there. So yeah, what do you want to know about them? Rimfei. So if you know anybody how Rimfei was, salty dog, awesome guy, knew everything. He was like a mentor. And so eventually then back in the 90s, I started a photo lab in El Segundo, was there for about 15, 18 years. Had a lot, since I was so much into educating people back then, I was probably the only photo lab around that had 8 tanks in there with fish all over the place, and every Saturday we would have kids coming in, do all this stuff, teaching about fish and everything like that. We needed another employee to come, and for some reason, I don't know how this got connected, Dick Bruin's son, Tommy, came in and says, I'm looking for a job. I had no clue this was leading me to where I was going to be today. So anyways, I hired Tommy, awesome person, everything like that. He's still a great friend. And then eventually, at the photo lab, here comes this one guy in a wheelchair back in the mid-90s, coming in, dropped off his roll of film, and he goes, do you have any problem with the fish? I go, yeah, but you just have to know how to deal with it and stuff like that, learn about this and that. The person's name was Jim Babbitt. So he was the one that goes, hey, can you do us a favor? And I said, what? He goes, we're having fish problems over there. I'm not telling anybody you're going in there, but can you test the water for me? So I was the inside person, testing water, making sure everything was fine. And so that connected me with the Roundhouse already through that whole thing. Digital World came in, shut the photo lab down, blah, blah, blah. Got a job at the aquarium. History from there on out. But anyways, I know I took a long thing to try to get into that. But what I have seen changes in the aquarium. I have seen changes. When I first got there, it was funny because I started, even though you could say I started in the mid-90s, eventually I got there in it was 99, 2000. And there was another director there, her name was Keisha. She needed somebody. I got in there, was all ready to go teach, and what do we have? It was in the middle of another renovation, big giant tubs on the ground and animals in the tubs and everything. But it's so lucky how I was able to teach. I can actually grab anything and talk for hours about it. Lynn, I'm not going to do that, I promise. But anyways, seeing these kids coming in from now all the time, it just I could walk in a kind of grumpy bad mood, and these kids will just enlighten me. Questions what they ask me, anything about the ocean, and seeing these kids learn, just looking into their eyes and the excitement what we're doing and everything. That's why I'm there at the aquarium. That's why I love to be at the aquarium. And the people I work with, just as that little family network I had at One Hour Color Photo, it's like I have another family that we do a lot of things. We all have the same goals in that aquarium. And now that we have somebody else in that family, which is Grace right over there, and we're so happy to have her too. Anyways, that's all I want to say about that, and thank you.
Matt and John, why don't you both come up, and Matt, you can just talk real briefly about yours, and John, you can kind of put the cap on it here. Take any questions.
Yeah, I'm Matt Friedman here. I've lived in Manhattan Beach since 1978.
Get closer to the mic.
I've lived here since 1978. Can you hear me okay? I've lived here since 1978, right? And I started volunteering at the aquarium in 2003. And I was working with their summer camp program. And so I was going out with the instructors and kind of wrangling the kids in the back to make sure they didn't get lost. So that was sort of my job there. Eric mentioned Keisha, who was the executive director at the time, and I was kind of like, was it Grace who was in the original group, and I was kind of hanging out at the aquarium. She says, hey, we need some more board members. You want to be on the board? I was like, okay. So I worked with Dick and talked to him and became a board member at that time. And about 6 months later, the person that was the president of the board decided to retire to take care of her family. So the board said, well, who's going to be the next president? Matt, why don't you be the president? So I ended up being president for about 10 years after that. So over that time, there was a lot we went through, and I think that they covered a lot of it, and Lynne went over a lot of the things that happened over that 10-year period. But one of the things was we ran into some financial hard times, and again, went to the community, and it was great because the community really came up to us and stepped up. I think Lynne also mentioned about the Downtown Business Association came in with $100,000 for us to start this van program. And where we go out and take our show on the road, and kids can see, you know, in their schools. And a lot of the disadvantaged schools can't afford to come, so it really gives us a program to get out and see the kids. As Eric was saying, you know, one of the things I found great about there was that seeing these kids in the class is amazing, and seeing their, you know, teachers. We have 3 or 4 great teachers, Eric and Val, Brittany, a few other ones. They give these amazing classes, and I think if you're at all interested, that you'd be welcome to come. I'm not speaking out of turn here, but I think that if you want to come in and oversee one of those classes, it's really amazing. So if you have the time, talk to Grace or Eric, and I'm sure they could set up a time for you to see what we do there. What else? I was just thinking about one kind of funny story from the beginning of the show here. You're talking about the history, and my uncle was in the real estate business, but I did my undergraduate work at Occidental College, which is out in Eagle Rock, if you're familiar with it. And they built the school right at the turn of the century. And at the time, the story is that they had a choice of building the school in Eagle Rock or building it in Westwood. And they said, oh, we're going to build it in Eagle Rock because it has more developmental possibilities than it would be in Westwood. So on that, I talked to my uncle, who was in the real estate business, and you know, he said, well, do you know why most oldest houses in LA are in Pasadena and in that side of LA? Because I always wondered why, you know, I love the beach, why weren't people coming down here? And he told me that at the time that when you would drive from downtown to Pasadena, the sun was behind you. And when you drive, so when people wanted to go to work, they drive from Pasadena, and that way the sun wasn't in your eyes going either way, and that's why people didn't want to come down to the beach, because the sun would be in your eyes all the way down and coming up in the morning. I don't know if it's true, but that's the story I heard. At any rate, it's really been wonderful working the aquarium, and I love supporting the community. It's great. Thank you.
Hi, I'm John Roberts. I'm the current president of OTS, which operates the Roundhouse Aquarium. My history was a little bit similar to Matt's and probably Lynne's too, although in a shorter time frame. I got involved almost 10 years ago, I took my grandson down to the aquarium, and he stood in front of the shark tank and just stared at the fish. And I had, come on, let's go, let's go. I couldn't drag him out of there. So I thought, well, this is really good. So I picked up a volunteer application and thought, I was retiring at the time. I'd been a biology professor at Cal State Dominguez Hills. This was something to do to keep active in science after retirement. So I signed up to volunteer, did that for a couple of years. And I guess they must have liked me because they asked me to be on the board. So I said, okay. And then I was on the board for a while, and at the time Lynne had been president and she was retiring. And they said, who wants to be president? And I said, oh, all right. But it was very interesting because that was at the beginning of the renovation project. And I was president throughout the entire process, from the planning phases to the completion and the dedication and the grand opening. And it's been very interesting. It's been like a journey. And on a good journey, you meet a lot of interesting people, you learn a lot of things, and eventually you arrive at a destination where you want to be. And this is the destination that we arrived at, the beautiful aquarium. One thing I want to say first is that the entire planning and construction process, as Lynne mentioned, involved 3 different cultures. There was the sort of corporate, there was the nonprofit, and there was city government. And in the beginning, I think we all were a little wary of each other in this, and particularly with regards to how decisions were made. Government and nonprofits tend to be very slow. I know from nonprofits, we require almost always board consensus before we make a decision. Government, I know, is responsible to the constituents in the city, and in the corporate world, decisions are centralized and you can move very, very rapidly. So there was some conflict with how we were making decisions at the time. But in the course of the design process, which lasted longer than a year, we realized that we all wanted the same thing, we had a lot in common, and we developed a lot of mutual respect. And the project turned out, I think, wonderfully. It's been recognized. There are a lot of, I have to read this so I get all the words right. It was awarded an award for the best recreation and athletic facility for a small city by the American Public Works Association. And we just received that award. So that the award was actually to the city, but everyone that was involved really felt very proud of that. The architectural firm Cambridge 7 uses this as an example. It's featured in a prominent place on their webpage, and they cite this when they're putting out proposals for other aquaria. We're also proud of it. We want to make sure that it's maintained and sustained, and so we have set up organizations. Michael Greenberg, who's the president of the Harrison